Have you ever been in the middle of saying something that truly mattered? A story, an idea, a truth you've been holding inside, and suddenly someone cuts you off? It could be your boss finishing your sentence, a friend who jumps in with their opinion, or your partner interrupting halfway through your thought. You smile politely. You whisper, "Oh, sorry, go ahead." The conversation moves on, but something inside you shrinks. That moment seems harmless, but it's not. Because every time you surrender your voice, you teach the world how much or how little it deserves to be heard. Studies from Harvard Business Review show that people who are interrupted frequently are 40% less likely to speak up again in the same conversation. Not because they don't have ideas, but because they start to believe their words carry less weight. And here's the deeper truth. Interruptions aren't just about noise. They're about power. They reveal who feels entitled to speak and who's been trained to stay quiet. This video isn't about how to talk louder or how to win arguments. It's about something more ancient, something the Stoics understood over 2,000 years ago, that calm presence, measured words, and emotional discipline are the true foundations of power. We'll uncover a simple framework that has stood the test of time. 3 words that can stop interruptions in their tracks, without anger, without aggression, and without losing your composure. 3 words once practiced by Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus, each one designed to help you reclaim your voice, your respect, and your presence. A few years ago, I was in a team meeting, sharing an idea I'd worked on for weeks. Halfway through my sentence, my manager jumped in. "Actually, what we should do is..." And just like that, my idea disappeared. Everyone turned to him, and I remember thinking, maybe it wasn't that important anyway. But that night, while reading Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, one line struck me like lightning. Do not waste words on what is unnecessary. Hold to what is essential. And I realized, if I didn't hold to what was essential in my own words, someone else would take it from me. That moment changed the way I spoke forever. I stopped trying to speak more. I started learning how to speak with presence. Because power isn't volume, it's steadiness. It's the quiet that makes people listen. So today, I'll show you how to reclaim that power. Not by fighting interruptions, but by mastering your response to them. Stay with me, because once you understand this, you'll never have to raise your voice to be heard again. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning, the kind where coffee tastes bitter and the meeting room feels colder than usual. I was halfway through explaining an idea, something I'd spent nights perfecting, when my boss leaned forward and said, "Right, but here's what we should do instead." The room shifted, eyes turned to him. My voice disappeared. I smiled, nodded, and stayed quiet. Inside, a small voice whispered, maybe I didn't explain it well enough. Later that day, as I walked home replaying that moment, I realized the silence that followed wasn't peace, it was surrender. That moment isn't rare. According to a 2022 study by the Harvard Business Review, employees who experience frequent interruptions in meetings report a 40% decrease in confidence when sharing new ideas. Women, in particular, are interrupted twice as often as men, and 80% of them admit to toning down their opinions afterward. But this isn't just a workplace problem. It happens everywhere, at dinner tables, in friendships, even in love. Every interruption sends the same subtle message. What I have to say matters more than what you were saying. When we talk about interruptions, we usually focus on who's being rude. But the Stoics would ask a different question. What power are you giving away when you go silent? Because an interruption isn't only an external act, it's an internal transaction. Each time you shrink back, you trade your presence for their approval. And over time, this becomes a silent habit, a pattern that tells your nervous system, stay quiet, it's safer. That's why many people stop finishing their thoughts, stop defending their ideas, and stop taking up space in their own conversations. It's not fear of others, it's fear of being seen. Neuroscience calls this learned silencing. Your brain starts associating interruption with emotional discomfort, so the next time it happens, it shuts down early just to avoid the sting. Think about the last time you wanted to add something, but someone else spoke louder, faster, or with more certainty. You felt that tiny hesitation in your chest, right? That's not hesitation. That's conditioning. You weren't born afraid to speak. You were trained to. Here's what I've learned. You can't stop people from interrupting you, but you can stop teaching them that it's okay. Because every go-ahead tells the world your words can wait. And every calm pause tells the world your words have weight. Presence isn't loud, it's deliberate. And the first step to reclaiming it is realizing that interruptions don't just break conversations, they break confidence. So if interruptions quietly reshape how we see ourselves, how do we take that power back? Without anger, without shouting, and without losing our calm? The answer lies in understanding something the Stoics already knew, that words themselves carry energy, authority, and command. Let's begin there, with how language shapes power. When the Romans built their empire, they didn't just conquer with armies, they conquered with language. One command from Caesar could move thousands of soldiers. One promise could start a war. One sentence, whispered in the Senate, could end a man's life. They understood something we've mostly forgotten. That words don't just describe reality, they create it. Modern science now proves what the Stoics sensed centuries ago. Neuroscientists at Princeton found that when someone speaks with clarity and intention, the listener's brain literally mirrors the same neural activity. In other words, words can synchronize two minds. Leadership research shows that people who choose calm, deliberate language are perceived as 43% more competent and trustworthy, even when saying the same message. So power isn't about volume. It's about how precisely your words transmit energy. In Stoic philosophy, language was seen as the mirror of reason. To speak clearly was to think clearly. To think clearly was to live wisely. Let's break that down. Power, as the Stoics defined it, has three layers. Presence, the ability to hold attention without force. Poise, the calm steadiness beneath your words. Precision, the discipline to say only what's essential. Most people today chase influence by being louder, faster, or cleverer. But the Stoics built influence by mastering these three. Their secret wasn't persuasion, it was clarity. A few years ago, I worked with a young executive named Claire. Brilliant mind, sharp ideas, but she spoke too fast, filling every silence with words. During meetings, her insights got lost in the noise. I asked her to try something simple. Before responding, breathe. Say less, but mean every word. 2 weeks later, she came back and said, I didn't realize silence could be louder than talking. Her team started leaning in when she spoke, not because she changed her message, but because she changed her energy. That's the paradox of language. When you speak less, but with presence, people listen more. Words are power in motion. Every sentence either reinforces your authority or dissolves it. When you fill the air with noise, you compete for attention. When you choose your words with calm precision, you command it. That's why Stoicism isn't about silence, it's about selective speech. Not saying less for the sake of humility, but saying less for the sake of impact. So if words themselves shape the energy of a room, how can we use them to reclaim our presence when someone interrupts us? The Stoics gave us the answer. Not in long speeches, but in 3 simple words that anchor attention, redefine hierarchy, and pull people back into the present. Let's begin with the first. Listen. A few months ago, I sat in a cafe watching 2 friends talk, or at least, one was trying to. Every time the first woman started sharing something about her new job, her stress, her plans, the other one cut in with, "Oh, I totally get that." Or, "You know what you should do?" She wasn't being cruel. She was being human. But within 5 minutes, the first woman's voice grew softer, her hands stopped moving, and eventually, she just listened. That moment revealed something powerful. Interruptions aren't only about noise, they're about need. Psychologists call it conversational dominance. It's the subtle urge to control the rhythm of dialogue, to shape how others see us through the act of speaking first or louder. A study at UCLA found that people who interrupt more often aren't necessarily confident. They're anxious. Their brains show higher activity in the amygdala, the region linked to fear and control. In other words, people interrupt because silence feels threatening. They fear being ignored, unseen, or left behind in the flow of conversation. So they fill every gap with words, hoping to prove they matter. If we look at it through the Stoic lens, an interruption is not a display of strength. It's a display of disorder. The Stoics believed every external action reflects an internal state. So, there are 3 archetypes of interrupters. The dominator, driven by ego, wants control. The fixer, driven by care, wants to help too soon. The anxious one, driven by insecurity, fears invisibility. Recognizing which type you're dealing with turns frustration into understanding. Because once you name the pattern, you stop personalizing it. I once coached a young manager named Daniel. He constantly interrupted his team, finishing their sentences, correcting small details. He told me, "I just want things done right." But after a few weeks of reflection, he admitted something deeper. "I'm scared that if I stay quiet, people won't see me as capable." That confession changed everything. He started listening more, and to his surprise, his team started respecting him more. He didn't lose authority by being silent. He earned it. When interruptions happen, there are 2 nervous systems colliding, one trying to assert and the other trying to defend. If you react with anger, you feed the first system. If you retreat with apology, you strengthen the second. The Stoic response? Neither fight nor flee. Simply observe, then redirect. That's how presence turns chaos into calm. Here's the truth most people miss. It's not your job to control who interrupts you. It's your job to control how deeply you let it shake you. Because every interruption is a test, not of your voice, but of your stability. When you stay calm in the noise, you show the room who actually holds the power. So the question isn't, how do I stop them from interrupting? It's, how do I reclaim attention without force? The answer, as the Stoics taught, lies in the mastery of language itself. The way a single word can shift the energy of an entire room. Let's explore that next. Beginning with the first word, listen. A few years ago, A journalist once asked a modern Stoic teacher, "How did philosophers like Marcus Aurelius or Seneca hold power without ever raising their voices?" He smiled and said, "They didn't speak to control others. They spoke to control themselves." That answer stayed with me, because in a world that rewards whoever shouts the loudest, self-control has become the rarest form of authority. And that's exactly what this next framework is about. 3 words, ancient, simple, and calm, that can help you reclaim presence the moment it's stolen from you. Throughout Stoic history, language was viewed not as decoration, but as discipline. Seneca wrote, "Speech is the mirror of the soul. When the soul is calm, the words are clear." Modern leadership studies echo the same truth. A 2021 MIT Sloan report found that leaders who speak with clarity and brevity are rated 46% more influential by their peers. The science behind it is simple. Clear words lower cognitive load for listeners, which makes your message feel more powerful, even when it's softer in tone. So power isn't in the noise. It's in the neural clarity your words create. The Stoics had a structure, a verbal discipline, that centered around 3 linguistic anchors. Listen commands attention. Important defines hierarchy and focus. Now brings all minds back to the present. Each word activates a different response in the listener's brain. Listen triggers the orienting reflex. The mind stops and tunes in. Important activates prioritization circuits, making the message stand out. Now engages the prefrontal cortex, creating urgency and presence. When used together, they form what I call the triangle of calm authority. Listen gives you attention. Important gives you weight. Now gives you momentum. That triangle, not volume or dominance, is what makes people stop and follow your lead. I once observed a senior negotiator during a high-stakes meeting. The room was chaotic. Multiple voices, clashing opinions, rising tension. Instead of shouting, he leaned slightly forward and said, "Listen, the important thing right now is this." The room froze. Laptops stopped clicking. Every pair of eyes turned toward him. He didn't demand authority. He embodied it. And later, when I asked how he learned to do that, he simply said, "I practice calmness more than persuasion." That's what modern communication often forgets. We chase influence through charisma, but influence built on noise collapses the moment silence arrives. Stoic power is different. It's not about dominating space. It's about directing energy. 3 words spoken calmly, intentionally, can shift a conversation from chaos to clarity. Because authority isn't granted. It's recognized in the way you speak. Now that we understand the framework, it's time to explore each word in action. How to use them, when to use them, and why they work on both the mind and the heart. Let's begin with the first, and perhaps the most underestimated one. The word that commands attention without aggression. Listen. Imagine this. A crowded meeting room. Voices clash. Keyboards click. Everyone's trying to talk over everyone else. And then, one person simply says, "Listen." No shouting. No anger. Just that one word. The room quiets. Heads turn. It's almost instinctive, like the body recognizing authority before the mind does. That's the hidden power of the word listen. It doesn't demand silence. It creates it. Neuroscientists call listen an orienting signal. When the brain hears it, the auditory cortex automatically pauses and refocuses. It's a survival mechanism. Humans evolved to stop when someone says, "Listen," because it could mean danger or something vital is about to happen. This is why great leaders and speakers from Stoic philosophers to modern CEOs. Use listen not as a command, but as a reset button for attention. Martin Luther King Jr. often began a new section of his speeches with the phrase, "Now listen," and instantly, thousands of people would fall silent. He didn't raise his voice. He lowered it, and the crowd leaned in. In the Stoic sense, listen is more than a word, it's a state of leadership. It's how you reclaim attention without aggression. There are 3 layers to its power. Auditory control. It captures the senses. People physically stop. Emotional grounding. It signals calm, not confrontation. Presence declaration. It reminds the room that you are here. Used correctly, listen doesn't silence others. It invites them into your focus. That's the essence of Stoic communication. Command through composure, not confrontation. I remember coaching a young team leader named Maya. She struggled in meetings because her team often talked over her. She told me, "I don't want to sound bossy." I said, "You don't need to sound bossy. You need to sound present." We practiced a simple routine. Whenever the group got loud, she'd wait for a brief pause, then say gently, "Listen, here's what we're deciding next." By the 3rd week, the team didn't just listen, they respected her pauses. Her calm became contagious. This works because listen aligns with what psychologists call the law of attention transfer. The person most grounded in a conversation unconsciously regulates everyone else's emotional tone. So when you speak calmly and say, "Listen," you're not forcing silence. You're lending your stability to the room. We live in a culture that worships being heard, but few ever practice the art of listening, even to themselves. The Stoics understood this paradox. To be truly listened to, you must first embody listening, because listen isn't just a word you say to others. It's a reminder you whisper to yourself. Listen to your tone. Listen to your presence. Listen before you speak. That's how calm becomes command. So once you've earned attention through listen, the next step is to anchor it, to show people why your words deserve to stay in the spotlight. That's where the second word enters. A word that changes the hierarchy of any conversation. Important. Picture this. You're in a meeting, presenting an idea you've worked on for weeks. You're mid-sentence when someone interrupts. And for a moment, you feel that familiar sting of invisibility. But instead of shrinking back, you breathe, look up, and say calmly, "The important point is this." Instantly, the interruption fades. The tone of the room shifts. Everyone stops to listen. That's the hidden magic of one simple word. Important. It doesn't fight for attention, it defines it. Neuroscientists at Stanford discovered that when people hear the word important, their brains trigger the salience network, the mechanism that prioritizes what information deserves attention. It's the same cognitive reflex that happens when someone says, "This part matters," or "You need to know this." The mind automatically sharpens focus, as if preparing to capture something of value. So when you use important intentionally, you're not being assertive, you're giving the brain a signal. This is where to pay attention. That's how you anchor value in conversation. Not by being louder, but by being specific about what truly matters. In the Stoic framework of communication, every conversation has 2 forces: noise and meaning. Noise is everything: reactive, ego, emotion, distraction. Meaning is what remains when all that fades away. The word important is your bridge between those two. It filters the unnecessary and focuses the essential. Here's how to use it consciously. Interrupt the noise with calm. Say, "The important thing here is," define the value clearly. Keep it short. One line only. Pause. Let silence amplify your words. This rhythm creates what the Stoics called measured speech, language that carries both precision and presence. Let me tell you about Claire, a product designer I once coached. In team discussions, she often felt overlooked. Her ideas were solid, but her voice got lost in the chatter. I asked her to try one adjustment. Before presenting her main idea, she'd begin with, "The important thing I want us to focus on is this." At first, it felt strange, almost too formal. But within 2 weeks, her manager began quoting her lines in follow-up meetings. Her voice had found weight, not because she spoke more, but because she spoke with value. That's the shift important creates. From being heard out of politeness to being heard out of respect. Behavioral psychologists call this semantic framing. By labeling a thought as important, you unconsciously direct others to assign it higher priority, a principle widely used in persuasion and leadership. It's subtle but powerful. The word important turns opinion into priority. Here's what most people get wrong. They think being important means sounding important. But the Stoics would disagree. True importance isn't declared. It's demonstrated through clarity. When you speak from ego, you chase attention. When you speak from purpose, you deserve it. So the question is never, how do I make them listen? It's, what part of this truly deserves to be heard? That's where integrity meets influence. So once you've earned attention with listen and anchored value with important, there's one final element that turns presence into power: timing. Because no word holds weight if it floats in the wrong moment. And that's where the third word brings everything home. The word that grounds every wandering mind into the present. Now, imagine you're in the middle of a heated discussion. Someone interrupts, voices overlap, tension rises, and instead of fighting for space, you take a breath and say, "Now let me finish this thought." That single word changes everything. The room doesn't just quiet down, it returns to you. Because now is the anchor that pulls everyone back into the present. In that instant, you're no longer reacting. You're leading the moment. Modern neuroscience explains why now is such a powerful cue. When we hear it, the brain's prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for focus and decision-making, activates immediately. It's the mind's way of saying, "This matters right here, right now." Meanwhile, the default mode network, which drifts into thoughts about the past or future, momentarily shuts off. That's why now is used in military commands, coaching, and even therapy. Because it doesn't just direct others' attention, it reclaims your own. The Stoics saw the present moment as sacred ground. Seneca wrote, "We are not masters of what was, nor of what will be, but only of what is now." For them, now wasn't about urgency. It was about ownership. You can think of now as the pulse of presence, and it works on 3 levels. Mental presence, stopping mental drift. Verbal presence, regaining rhythm in speech. Emotional presence, signaling calm authority. When you say now, you remind everyone, including yourself, that this is the only moment that deserves energy. I once worked with a startup founder named Lucas. He had brilliant ideas, but every meeting spiraled into chaos. His team constantly talked over him. One day, instead of pushing back, he paused and said firmly, "Now, let's come back to the point." The chatter stopped. Not because he sounded strict, but because the word now snapped everyone into alignment. Afterward, he told me, "It's strange. When I said now, I felt like time slowed down." And that's exactly what happens. You regain command, not through force, but through timing. Behavioral research from the University of Chicago found that people respond 32% faster to requests that include time anchors like now or today than to neutral phrasing. It's not about pressure, it's about focus. Now tells the brain, this isn't theory, this is action. It transforms attention into momentum. Here's what the Stoics would say. The past is a lesson, the future is a theory, but now is a decision. Most people lose power because they speak from memory or anxiety. They defend what was or chase what could be. But when you speak from now, you speak from truth. The only place influence actually lives. That's why composure is magnetic. Because presence isn't just where you stand, it's where your words live. So far, we've learned how listen gains attention, important defines value, and now grounds presence. But there's a trap many of us still fall into. A single word that quietly dissolves all that authority the moment we speak it. It sounds polite, it feels safe, and yet it silently teaches the world to overlook us. That word is sorry. It happens faster than we notice. You're interrupted in a meeting, and before you even think, the words slip out. Oh, sorry, go ahead. It feels polite. It feels safe. But beneath that softness, something powerful happens. You're not just apologizing for interrupting. You're apologizing for existing in the space of the conversation. That's why sorry, when used in the wrong moments, isn't humility. It's self-erasure. A study from the University of Waterloo found that women say sorry 34% more often than men, not because they make more mistakes, but because they perceive more things as offenses. In workplace settings, frequent apologizers are statistically less likely to be promoted and more likely to have their ideas dismissed in group discussions. Neuroscientists call this the deferral reflex. When we say sorry unnecessarily, we activate the same neural pathways associated with guilt and submission. It's our brain's way of avoiding conflict. But it also teaches others that our voice carries less weight. The Stoics would have called this a false virtue. They valued humility, but never self-silencing. To them, apology has its rightful place when we've caused harm, not when we've simply spoken. Here's the Stoic framework for conscious apology. Apologize when it restores trust, not when it reduces discomfort. Apologize for actions, not for emotions. Apologize once, then move forward. Never dwell in guilt. Every unnecessary sorry chips away at your integrity because it tells the world your comfort matters more than my truth. I once coached a woman named Emily, a brilliant analyst with strong insights, but she began almost every sentence with, sorry. Just to add, I asked her to try one small change. Replace sorry with, here's my thought. The first time she did it, she said later, it felt unnatural, like I was taking up too much space. But within a month, her manager told her, you sound more confident lately, people are actually listening. She didn't change her content, only her posture. And that posture began with a single word she stopped saying. I once coached a woman named Emily, a brilliant analyst with strong insights, but she began almost every sentence with, sorry. Just to add, I asked her to try one small change. Replace sorry with, here's my thought. The first time she did it, she said later, it felt unnatural, like I was taking up too much space. But within a month, her manager told her, you sound more confident lately, people are actually listening. She didn't change her content, only her posture. And that posture began with a single word she stopped saying. Behavioral psychologists describe this as verbal framing. Every word either expands or shrinks your perceived authority. When you begin with sorry, you shrink your boundary before anyone asks you to. When you begin with, here's what I think, you assert your right to exist in the dialogue. That shift is microscopic in sound, but monumental in impact. Here's the paradox. Apology, when misused, becomes arrogance in disguise. Because it assumes other people's comfort depends on your self-erasure. The Stoics believed in balance. Speak without pride. Listen without fear. And when necessary, apologize once, then return to truth. Because sorry should never be the price you pay to be heard. So if sorry is the trap that weakens presence, what's the way out? There's a simple phrase, calm, respectful, yet firm, that reclaims the moment without tension. It doesn't demand attention, it earns it. That phrase is, listen, there's more. Let's explore how this subtle shift transforms not only your conversations, but the way people perceive your value. A few weeks after Emily stopped saying sorry, she told me something interesting. She said, when people interrupt me now, I don't freeze anymore. I just take a breath and say, listen, there's more. And suddenly, the energy shifts. No one gets defensive. No one feels challenged. They just stop and listen. That's the beauty of this phrase. It's not confrontation, it's continuation. It tells the world, I'm not done yet, without ever breaking composure. Linguists call this a continuation cue. It's a verbal bridge that signals unfinished meaning, and our brains are wired to resolve it. According to a 2018 study from the University of Michigan, people are 68% more likely to remain silent and wait when they perceive that the speaker hasn't finished their thought. Phrases like, there's more, let me finish, or the key part is, trigger what's known as the closure loop, the brain's need to complete what has been left open. So when you say, listen, there's more, you're not commanding attention, you're inviting curiosity. From a Stoic perspective, this phrase is the perfect balance between assertion and serenity. It embodies 3 Stoic principles of communication. Clarity. It states your intention directly. I'm not finished. Calmness. The tone remains neutral. There's no ego, no offense. Continuity. It preserves harmony by keeping dialogue flowing. Unlike sorry, which contracts your presence, listen, there's more, expands it, without forcing anyone else to shrink. This is what Stoics called measured courage. The strength to hold your space without stealing someone else's. A client of mine, Michael, once tried this during a tense team review. He was explaining a key insight when a senior colleague cut him off. Normally, he would have backed down, but this time, he smiled and said, listen, there's more. The next part connects everything. The room quieted. The colleague nodded and gestured for him to continue. Afterward, Michael laughed and said, it was the first time I didn't feel like I had to fight to be heard. That's the shift this phrase creates. It doesn't push back. It pulls others in. Behavioral communication studies show that people naturally mirror conversational energy. When you stay calm and steady, others unconsciously adjust their tone to match yours. So by saying, listen, there's more, with composure, you do 2 things at once. You redirect attention back to your point. You reset the emotional temperature of the room. That's not manipulation. That's emotional leadership. The Stoics would call this the discipline of speech, the ability to direct silence instead of being ruled by it. Because the moment you say, listen, there's more, you reclaim ownership of the conversation and remind everyone calmly, without ego, that your words carry substance. Sorry makes your presence sound like noise. Listen, there's more, makes it sound like truth. But these phrases, listen, important, now, and listen, there's more, are not just linguistic tricks. They're reflections of how you see yourself. Because ultimately, the way you speak reveals the way you think, and the way you think reveals who you've become. In our final part, we'll bring it all together. The Stoic lesson behind every word, and how presence becomes your greatest form of integrity. When Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journal late at night, he wasn't trying to impress the world. He was reminding himself quietly, honestly, waste no words on what is unnecessary. For the Stoics, speech wasn't just a tool, it was a mirror. Every word revealed the quality of one's inner world. And if the last few parts of this series have taught us anything, it's that presence, real presence, isn't about volume, posture, or power. It's about alignment. Your words, your tone, your values all walking in the same direction. That's what they called integrity. Modern psychology now confirms what Stoic philosophers practiced centuries ago. Studies on linguistic congruence show that people who speak in alignment with their beliefs are perceived as more trustworthy, composed, and authoritative, even when their tone is soft. It's not the loudness of your words that builds credibility. It's their consistency. When you speak with integrity, when your language and your character point to the same truth, you create what cognitive scientists call resonant presence. Others feel it before they can explain it. Let's bring everything together into a Stoic framework. The 4 pillars of presence. Awareness. Notice when you lose your voice. Restraint. Pause before you fill the silence. Clarity. Say only what carries purpose. Integrity. Align your words with your values. These 4 are not performance tricks. They're disciplines, quiet habits of the mind. Because every interruption, every sorry, every moment of tension isn't a threat to your power. It's a test of your composure. I remember one evening, after a workshop, a young man approached me and said, "I've always been afraid of sounding small, but now I realize it's not about sounding big, it's about sounding real." He'd started practicing the 3 words, listen, important, now, and replaced sorry with listen, there's more. He said, "People don't interrupt me as much anymore. Not because they fear me, but because they feel me." That's presence. It's not demanded, it's earned. And once earned, it becomes effortless. Leadership studies from Harvard Business Review call this the integrity loop, a reinforcing cycle between what you think, what you say, and what others perceive. When your thoughts align with your speech, you project calm confidence. That confidence earns respect, and that respect deepens your integrity. It's a feedback loop of trust, both inward and outward. The Stoics never chased charisma, they cultivated character. Because charisma fades when the spotlight dims, but character commands presence even in silence. And maybe that's the final lesson of all this. Your words don't need to be perfect, they just need to be true. When your voice and your values match, you no longer have to fight to be heard. You become the quietest person in the room, and somehow everyone listens. So remember the sequence. Listen to claim attention. Important to define value. Now, to anchor presence. Listen, there's more to continue with calm authority. And above all, speak not to impress, but to express what is essential. Because the one who embodies respect never has to ask for it. They carry it wherever they go. If this message resonated with you, take a moment not to like or comment, but to pause and listen to your own thoughts. Ask yourself, am I speaking from noise or from truth? And if you're ready to live with calm authority in a noisy world, subscribe not to this channel, but to the discipline of your own integrity.